For episode 14, the story begins at Hook Mountain. First thing we see is Snowman and his sidekick, Snow Meow. And long story short, by the time the snowman looked over his shoulder, he found out that his sidekick, Snow Meow, had wandered off. So he went to look for him. So after the snowman found his sidekick, guess where he ended up at? An old Thundrillium mine that's been closed up for years. But not just that, but it's abandoned. But the snowman got upset because his sidekick got inside for some reason. Meanwhile, back with Snowman, who's Snowman's psychic, he's not only inside the old abandoned Thundrillium mine, but he just heard laughter coming from inside. He had no idea what's going on, but he had to find out where that laughter's coming from. But then Snowman decided not to investigate and then heads back to his psychic, the Snowman, to meet him outside of the mine. So he did. Back with the snowman, he's not only glad to see that his psychic snowmeow made it out all right, he had a reason why the Thundrillium mine was abandoned and closed up. He said that there's something dangerous inside. Even though the snowman had pleaded himself a case to say he had no idea and that he was reboarding the mine, but he said that whatever's going on, anybody who goes into the mine has not come out since. Meanwhile, at Sky Tomb, inside, we see Alluro talking to Luna, the leader, including Amok and Chilla, that there's something going on Hook Mountain, and there's an abandoned Thundrillium mine that's located there, because, according to Alluro, he has a map that shows him that. Alluro says, wait, there's more, because here comes a problem. Because every third earther that ever goes inside the old Thundrillium mine has not come out since. And that's why it's been abandoned, he said. According to Alluro, he said that this is the good news for the lunatics, so once they find the mine, they'll be all theirs, according to him, or so they thought. Back with Luna, who's the leader, she not only agrees with Alluro that this is indeed the good news, and she said in her case, and she's not wrong, that everybody knows that there's no way that the Thundercats can survive without Thundrillium. So she suggested that the lunatics should get the supply first before they did. She also suggested that if they could pull it off, they could become the kingpins of the earth. So Chilla is not only agreeing with Alluro's good news, and of course from her leader Luna, she says, well, what are we waiting for? Let's get there. And so the lunatics head off. Now at Cat's Lair, when Lionel shows up to tell Chitara, Tigra, Panthro, and Snarf to let them know that he's off to the Burble Village to deliver the seedlings and won't be back until later. So Snarf, after he heard what Lionel says, he says, take all the time you need, because he'll be spending the day at the tower helping out his nephew. You remember him from episode 9 of the 5-part story, since his nephew's going to be there. The reason? Because according to Snarf, he's helping out his nephew hooking up the tractor beam at the tower, so Panther was asking Snarf if he needed any help with that. Snarf declines Panthro's suggestion and said that even though he's not the heroic type, but he knows how to install an equipment such as the tracking beam at the tower, he said. With Lionel, before heading off, he told Snarf the best advice he can give him. He says, anyone who could put up with us is pretty heroic. So after that, Lionel leaves the control room. Later, back on Hook Mountain with Snowman and his sidekick Snowmeow, who's still in the front of the old Thundrillium mine, and that's when 3 of the lunatics show up. Luna the leader, Amok, and Chilla. By the time that Snowman knew that the lunatics had just showed up, so what Snowman wants to know is what are they doing here? We come to drill Thundrillium, Luna replied. But the snowman refused and then told Luna that the mine is too dangerous, but Luna just dismissed him. So then Chilla tells her leader Luna that she'll handle it, so she decided to confront with the snowman. So back with Chilla, she decided to approach the snowman, and what she did was something she never did before. She created an ice grenade and throws it at the snowman and his sidekick. Luckily, they moved out of the way just before the grenade exploded. Back with the snowman after he avoided Chilla's attack, it's now his turn to make his move. He then pleads his case to say that he's concerned more about the Lunatics' safety than their own. Thanks to the snowman's snowlance powers, it created a barricade for the Lunatics. But unfortunately, picking one of them up was Amok of the Lunatics, who was back with Luna. She just told Chilla to show the snowman who's really the boss, and so that's what Chilla did. So, as Snowman and Psychic Snowmeow had made their escape in the trees, that's when Chilla does what she knows best. She uses her firepower. And guess what she did? She set the trees on fire. Back with Luna, she just tells Chilla, come on, we gotta get out of here. We have mining to do. And so all three of them head off. Back with the snowman, he tries to put the fire out the best way he knew how. His sidekick, Snowman, wanted the snowman to evacuate, but when the snowman refused, instead he told his sidekick to go get help right away. And it's the only chance, while Snowman suggested to stay behind to try to put out the fire. Back with Snowman, who's Snowman's sidekick, he went to get help. But he has a problem. He has to jump across, but instead of doing that, he jumped down instead. So that's what he did. Back with the Lunatics, Luna, the leader, and along with Otmuk and Chilla, they're now inside the abandoned Thundrillium mine. Next thing you know, Luna, Otmuk, and Chilla had hit the mother lode. They found Thundrillium all right, and that's good news for them. But they had no idea that they were suddenly realized that they're not going to be alone for very long. And that's because when Luna pleaded her case to say no wonder the Third Earthers are so scared to mine the Thundrillium, a voice comes out of nowhere and tells the Lunatics, Luna, Outmug, and Chilla, well, luckily for me, you're not. And that's when they're face to face with a stranger that they've never seen before. It's the Mad Bubbler, and he just introduced himself to the Lunatics, Chilla, Luna, and Outmug. No wonder the mine's been closed up. That's because Snowman had tried to warn them, but they wouldn't listen. So what the Mad Bubbler did is what he knows best. He uses his bubbles. The three lunatics tries to run away, but there is no point in escaping it, and that they're trapped in the bubbles. Long story short, after the Mad Bubbler had finished pleading his case to say this is what happened to the last victims, and now you shall destroy yourselves, and etc. So after he disappeared, that's exactly what the lunatics did. They went against each other. So Almec and Luna went first to attack, so what Almec did is what he knew best. He uses his super strength. But Chilla takes care of that problem by freezing his arm. That's what she knows best. Then what Chilla did next was unbelievable. She froze both Almec and Luna in ice. So Chilla runs off first after that, and I'm not sure how Amok broke out of the ice, but he actually did. So he and Luna went to catch up with her. Meanwhile, at the Tower of Omens, now Snarfu had just left the cat's lair earlier that day. He's helping his nephew hook up the tracking beam. While Snarfer, his nephew, had just told Chitara at the cat's lair's control room after receiving a transmission that everything is fine. Kessler's control room, Chitara was asking Snarfer, have you made any progress? Back at the tower's control room, that's when Snarfer answers Chitara's question. Yes. After Snarfer had pleaded a case to say it shouldn't be a problem, but on the contrary, that's when Snarf knew that it was a problem when he got zapped himself and then got tied up in the chair with a cord. Then Snarfer had to rephrase that statement and says, well, we may have a minor setback. A minor setback, Snarf asked. I wonder what would happen if we, to coin a phrase, have a major setback. So meanwhile, back at the Kessler's control room, Chitara, however, had just ended her transmission with the Tower of Omens and with Snarfer. And that's when Panthro shows up and says, guess who I ran into on the way? It's Snowmeow. You remember Snowman's sidekick? Panthro explains to Chitara that Snowmeow has been trying to tell him something, but he couldn't figure it out. Even Tigra went to approach Snowmeow, and so did Chitara. Tara, now you may say it's crazy, but she told her friends that she's starting to communicate with Snowman, telepathically speaking, of course. So what he is telling her that Snowman is in trouble. So after that, Chitara told Petro and Tigra that there's no time to lose. They must head to Hook Mountain right away. So that's exactly what they did. So, in the field liner, we have Panthro, Chitara, Tigra, and Snowmeow, who's Snowman's psychic. They're now on their way. Well, the good news for the Thundercats, they've made it to Hook Mountain. And thanks to Tigra, he sees the snowman surrounded by flaming trees. And speaking of the snowman surrounded by flaming trees, he tried desperately to put out the fire, but he failed miserably. Things are looking bad. But then, good news for the snowman, he manages to escape from the burning trees. Now here comes the bigger problem. Because the trees being on fire, the ice started to crack. Luckily for the snowman, he sees the feliner up above, and guess what it's doing? It's putting out the fire. Well, good news for the feliner, the fire's now put out. Now here comes the bad news. Snowman's still in trouble because remember the ice he's standing on? He's now falling into the water. Back with Chitara, she notices that the snowman's now in the water and he's still in trouble. So with no time to lose, that's when the feliner rushed to his rescue. So, Patrol the Thundercat, speaking of which, decided to go in after the snowman. But there's a problem. The tree trunk just severed the rope. That's when Tiger panicked. Back with Panther and Snowman, they're now struggling in the water. That's when there's some worse news. There's a waterfall up ahead, and of course, poor Panther and Snowman will be swallowed by it. Things are looking bad for Snowman and Panthro unless back in the feliner, aha, Chitara came up with a plan. She suggested to Tigra to freeze up the water. So that's exactly what the feliner did. News, now that the feliner had froze up the water, Panthro and the Snowman are saved. Also the good news, what the feliner did next is that it went ahead to pick them up. Now that the rescue mission was finished, luckily for the feliner, it found a place to land. Panther went first to thank his friends for everything that they did for himself and the snowman. Now, according to the snowman, he told the Thundercats there's bad news, because earlier the lunatics had arrived, Luna the leader, including Amok and Chilla. And here's some even worse news. They're already inside the old Thundrillium mine. Back with the Thundercats after they've learned the bad news, Tiger went first to speak in his case to say there's no way those lunatics are going to get their hands on the Thundrillium that's inside of that old mine, he said. So Panther went next to not only agree with Tiger, but then speaks his case to say we gotta go stop them. But Snowman says, wait, there's a problem. You cannot go inside of that mine, he said. Then the snowman says that there's a bigger problem because others had went inside that old mine before, but nobody ever came out, he said. Panther says, forgive me for speaking out of turn, but those lunatics that were inside of the mine before, they're not us, he said. So everybody had arrived at the old mine. Now remember, that's the same old mine that was sealed up. So, although we didn't see it, but it is confirmed that the Thundercats went in the exact same mine as the Lunatics did. And as you can probably tell, the Snowman had a bad feeling about it. Back inside the old Thundrillium mine, as you may have can tell, the Lunatics are still fighting each other, Chilla, Luna, and Amok. Remember, the Lunatics had just moments ago met the Mad Bubbler, and he just puts them under a spell to destroy each other. Back with the Thundercats, now that they have arrived at the exact same mine as the Lunatics did, they just couldn't believe what they seen. And Panther just pleaded the case, and he's not wrong, that the Lunatics are too busy fighting amongst themselves. Before the Lunatics can do anything about it to destroy the Thundercats, they fell into the hole in the floor. The Thundercats who saw what had happened, they just couldn't believe it. Mad Bubbler, when the Thundercats looked over their shoulders, and there he was, and they met him just like what the Lunatics did. So, just like what the Lunatics did, what the Mad Bubbler did next is what he did to the Lunatics, put them under a spell. And his bubbles, of course. So bad news for the Thundercats, they did the exact same thing as the Lunatics did. Destroy each other, just as the Mad Bubbler said. Or the lunatics who had earlier fell through the hole. Now, don't ask me how, but somehow they just got out of the mine from the back. And when that happened, the mad bubbler's spell broke. So, yep, you've heard right. The lunatics are now back to their normal bad selves again. Before you know it, Chilla just told her leader Luna the bad news. Remember the mine they just left from? So Chilla told her that there's no need for them to take the Thundrillium anymore because she says that the mine's inoperable. Back with Luna after learning the bad news from Chilla, she says, well, at least we can look on the bright side. That's true, Chilla says, because she just found out that the Thundercats had just arrived in the exact same mine they just left from. In other words, Wachilla is telling Luna that this is good news for them because the Thundercats just found themselves in the mine, so there's no way that they are coming out, or so that's the case. Back with Lino, he's talking to Roberbill, the leader of the Burbles at the Burble Village. So what Roberbill did is that he thanked Lionel. But then suddenly, Lionel's sword just told him that there's something wrong. So, as always, just like what any good guy would do, what Lionel did is that he looked through his sword's eye to tell him what happened. And so he did. And by the time that Lionel looked through the sword's eye, what he saw was unbelievable. Remember the old Thundrillium mine back on Hook Mountain? That's where Chitara, Pathro, and Tiger are now. They're not only inside of the mine, but they're fighting against each other. Back with Lionel, he just told Roberbill after looking through his sword that he has no idea what's going on, but he has to put a stop to this, whatever it was, right away. But Roberbill told him, wait a minute. Then Roberbill explained to Lionel about the legend of the mine. And as legend has it, according to Roberbill, that anybody that enters the mine itself is not coming out. Lionel, although he agrees with Roberbill, but he says that his friends, the Thundercats, are in there. And according to him, he asked the question, do you really think we're capable of anything that's going on and anything that's evil in there? Then the spirit of Jaga's voice just told Lionel, I'm afraid the legend is true. So after Jaga's spirit had pleaded the case to say that what Roberbill told Lionel was true, but then Lionel demanded a question after he pleaded his case to say he's the leader of the Thundercats and etc. Then asked, how could I be capable in such a task like this if there's evil in my heart? Well, to answer Lionel's question, according to Jaga and all of us, there's a capacity for good and evil itself. According to Jaga, he also said that there is always a choice. Jaga assures Lionel of a warning that once inside of the mind, he'll lose that ability to make his own choices. But then Jaga says there is one solution. Out of all of us, there is the species that's capable against all evil, and that would be the Snarfs themselves. So that means Snarf and his nephew. Before Jaga's spirit disappeared, he told Lionel to send for them right away. So after that, he left. After that, Lionel told Roberville that he must get to Hook Mountain right away. So back with Lionel, though it's confirmed that he had arrived at Hook Mountain, he did what any good guy would do. As always, he summons the Thundercat signal from his sword. So he did. So meanwhile, at the Tower of Omen's control room, Snarfer, who's Snarf's nephew, just lets his uncle know that there's a Thundercat signal coming from Hook Mountain. Then get me out of here, Snarf says. We gotta move. So both Snarf and Snarfer had arrived on Hook Mountain on a Thunderclaw. So by the time they arrived, that's when Lionel told this mission to them. Before that could get underway, he tells them the good news that yes, he's fine. But unfortunately for Panthro, Tiger, and Chitara, they're not exactly fine because they're now in the mines. So it's now up to Snarf and his nephew to get them out. So after that, they were sent on their way. So meanwhile, inside the old Thundrillium mine, that's when Snarf reminded his nephew that if he can keep his cool, that everything will be all right. Okay, Uncle Snarf, Snarfer said. No problem. But then they heard laughter coming from out of nowhere. It's the Mad Bubbler. Now remember, that's the same Mad Bubbler that the Lunatics before they left have met, and the Thundercats had met. So now it's the Snarf's turn to meet him, and so they did. Long story short, after the mad bubbler had trapped the Snarfs in the bubbles just like what he did twice before, but it didn't work. Instead of destroying themselves. So you know what this means, the mad bubbler spells didn't affect them at all. Then Snarfer, her Snarf's nephew, just spotted Chitara, and so did his uncle. But wait, she's not alone because let's not forget Tiger and Panthro, they're there too. Back with Chitara and Panthro, what Chitara did first is that she has Panthro disarmed, but luckily for Snarf, he catches the nunchucks. Back with Snarfer, who's Snarf's nephew, he decided to disarm Chitara, so that he did that. Back with Snarf, good news for him, he manages to avoid Tiger and Chitara, who are now disarmed. And he's about to bring it down to the ground, and when he did, that's when he sees Tiger showing up. When Tiger found out that Snarf and his nephew had taken Bolchitar's baton and Panther's nunchucks, he got upset with them and started chasing after them. But not afterwards that Chitara and Panther started catching up with them. Back with the Snarfs, that's when Snarfer says, "Hurry, they're catching up to us." "Keep running," Snarf says, "we're almost out of here." Luckily for the Snarfs, they made it out first, but unfortunately for Tiger, he uses his bullet whip on them. Guess who showed up just in time? It's Lino. And he does what any good guy would do. He uses his sword power. And when he did that, Panther, Chitara, and Tiger all went back to normal again. Just like what the Lunatics did. So now that everyone's back to normal, that's when Chitara asked the question, what happened? What's going on? Well, Tiger was next to speak in his case to thank Snarf and his nephew for saving them when they did. So Snarf went first to speak in his case. It was all a day's work, really. Yes, indeed, Snorver says, because he happens to agree with his uncle. So yes, it is true. It is thanks to them that Tigra, Panthro, and Chitara are now back to their normal good guy selves again. So now that everybody left Hook Mountain, later that night at the Tower of Omen's control room, remember the tower's tracking beam that Snarf was supposed to do? But because all the wires are messed up, everybody's now doing it. We have Panthro, Chitara, Tigra, Linksil, Pomira, Bengali, Chitara, and of course, let's not forget Lino, who's also there. And of course, Panthro pleaded his case with Snarf to how the tracking beam wires work and how they must be pulled apart to make sure they stay connected. As his turn to plead a case with Panther and says, "Gee, I really did make a mess out of these." Snarf, Tiger says when it's his turn to plead his case. "Besides, you and Snarfer deserve the credit today," he said. Tiger's case is not wrong, and then it's Pomara's turn to agree with him. Because, as Tiger says, had it not been for Snarf and his nephew, then himself, Chitara and Panther would have been stuck in that mine, fighting amongst themselves forever. And then it's Lionel's turn to ask Snarf a question. "Wasn't that you that told me earlier back at the lair that you're not the heroic type?" Lionel says nah, because he just suddenly dismissed it. And then it's Snarfer, who's Snarf's nephew's turn to plead his case. "Well, it goes to show you, you never can tell. And by the way, you got the wires on backwards." "I know what I'm doing," Snarf said. Or at least that's what he thought, until he got himself electrocuted again and had the wires wrapped in the chair, just like earlier that morning. As that happens, that's when Snarf says, "On the other hand, I'll leave the electronics to Panthro. It's safer that way." So that's good advice for Snarf because after all, it is indeed Snarf and his nephew who indeed saved the day. And so that ends episode 14.